I want to let you know that this is not a sponsored video. Walnut did send me the Spectra Advanced for free so that I could do this review. However, it is going to be completely unbiased. There are links in the description below whereby if you click and purchase through them, I do make a little bit of money. However, it is at no extra expense to you. So I do really appreciate if you do purchase through those links because it helps keep this channel alive and me bringing you more and more electric skateboard reviews. So the interesting thing about this electric skateboard is that the Spectra Advanced doesn't require a remote. You control the acceleration and the braking by using what Spectra call their 3D step posture control. By applying your weight on your front foot, you go forward, and applying your weight on your back foot, you brake. I pulled it out of the box, had a brief look at the instructions, and then took it out for my first ride. And oh my god, my first attempt at riding this thing was nothing but frustrating. It simply just wouldn't work for me. It kept beeping, the LEDs were changing colors, and I just couldn't figure out why. But then my girlfriend hopped on it and she had no problems, and then my best mate got on it to have a ride and he did it just fine. I couldn't for the life of me figure out what was going on until I realized that they both ride goofy and I ride regular. Now surely that can't be the reason why I couldn't ride this skateboard. But I jumped on the e-board goofy footed and lo and behold, I started moving. So I swapped back to regular foot and tried to replicate exactly what I did when I was in the goofy stance, but I just couldn't get it moving. I was at a loss. I couldn't for the life of me figure out what was going on. So I took it back inside and jumped on YouTube to see if I could get any tips on how to ride this board properly. And I was surprised to see that pretty much everyone out there who has tried it, except the dudes from Braille Skateboarding, were having trouble with it. And they all dismissed it as a piece of junk pretty quickly. But I wasn't ready to give up on it just quite yet. So I emailed Spectra with my concerns, and they said that the e-board has an AI system inside that learns how you ride. And it's even smart enough to pick up on whether you're a beginner rider or a more confident rider, and it will tailor the experience to your level of riding. So with that newfound sense of wonderment with this AI technology, I took it back outside and I just kept at it. I connected the board to the app, updated the firmware, and played around with all the braking and acceleration settings. And I even tried a bunch of different stances to see if I could get this thing going properly. And eventually I found an answer that worked for me. Because I've skated before, I always kick push with my back foot. So I was getting on the Spectra Advanced with my front foot first and then my back foot. So I decided to do something different. I tried putting my back foot on first, then my front foot. And then I got 2 fast beeps and it started moving. And I couldn't wipe the smile off my face after figuring it out. But then, without any warning, the brakes applied and I was thrown forward. But it didn't matter because it was progress. I was slowly figuring it out. See, what I realized is the posture control system in the Spectra Advanced is based on weight distribution. So in order for the Spectra to understand how much weight needs to be applied on the front pad to go forward and how much to be applied on the back to go back, it first needs to understand how much you weigh. And to figure this out, it does it in the first few seconds after you initially step on the board. The Spectra Advanced will let you know when it's ready because it'll give you 2 quick beeps when it's good to go. If it's not ready, it'll give you a short beep followed by a long beep. My problem was I was getting on the board and immediately leaning forward. So the Spectra thought that the weight that I was applying to the front pad was my natural weight, which meant that to accelerate, I had to apply even more pressure to the front pad, which was just awkward and unnatural. And sometimes I was applying so much pressure to the front pad that I would nosedive and come straight off the board. This was partly my fault, but also partly because the board is so nose heavy, but I'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the motors. Once I figured out the acceleration, my next issue was the braking. At first, when I went forward to accelerate, the board would move, but naturally the small amount of inertia would send my weight onto my back foot applying the brakes. And as the brakes unexpectedly applied, my body would move forward going onto the accelerator, and it just became a balancing act. In the end, what worked best, not perfect, but best for me was after the board had registered my body weight and gave me the success beep, I moved my back foot onto the top of the kicktail off of the rear pads. That way, when the board started to move, I could brace myself with my back foot without applying any pressure to the brakes. Then when I needed to brake, I would just move my back foot onto the rear pads to slow down. It's not really Spectra's intended method of riding, but it works for me, and really that's probably how I would ride an electric skateboard with a kicktail anyway. So in short, To ride the Spectra electric skateboard, here are the steps that work for me. Get on with your back foot first, followed by your front, covering 4 of the arrows. Balance your weight evenly between the front and back foot until you hear 2 short beeps. If you hear a short then a long beep, that's an error. Get off the board and start again from step 1. Lean forward, applying weight to your front foot. Move your back foot to the back of the kicktail. To brake, move your back foot onto the rear pads and distribute your weight onto your back foot. So far from my experience, I don't think the Spectra Advanced would do too well on longer trips. It's just too small and finicky. I think the best scenario for the use of this electric skateboard is where you'll be riding for shorter trips and you may have to carry the board every now and then. For example, riding from class to class on your college campus, or going out to meet a friend at a coffee shop nearby. Or if you catch the train to work, it would be the perfect last mile solution from home to the station and then station to the office. The Spectra Advanced claims to have a top speed of 15.5 miles per hour, which is 25 kilometers an hour. I tried to reach that speed, but I couldn't quite get there. I don't think it's because the Spectra Advanced is incapable of riding that fast. I just think I couldn't figure out the weight distribution properly. I got up to about 9 to 10 miles per hour or 15 kilometers an hour, and honestly, that's probably enough speed considering how small the board is. I didn't do a full range test for the Spectra Advanced because I don't think it's designed for long trips, and I wouldn't recommend that you buy this board if you do plan on going on longer commutes. It's really for doing lots of little short trips without having to charge the board very often. Another cool feature of the Spectra is its hill climbing tech. It will sense when you're riding uphill and it will turn the power dial up to give you more power to ride up with ease. It was kind of hard to tell if this actually works because you don't feel the board get any more powerful and you don't ride any faster. However, it also senses when you're riding downhill and will apply a speed limit so you don't end up flying down the hill out of control. The brakes on the Spectra Advance almost work too well. And I say this because they are super sensitive. But you can modify this in the app. When I was riding, I actually set my braking sensitivity to 10% and my braking power to 30%. Because you don't actually ride that fast on the Spectra, those settings were plenty enough to bring me to a slow enough speed where I could just jump off the board. When you do step off the board or you fall off, the Spectra Advance is smart enough to apply the brakes automatically so that it doesn't run out into the traffic. This is great in theory and works a charm if you're intentionally doing it, but it is very sensitive. Quite often when I moved my feet around on the board, it would think that I'm falling off and the brakes would apply super quickly and I'd be thrown off. The Spectra Advance has a tiny 19.4-inch deck made of carbon fiber, and all of the electronics are housed inside the deck. The grip tape is fairly coarse. It has some arrows printed on top of the deck to indicate where you need to put your feet, and it also feels a little bit spongy because the weight sensing pads are underneath the grip tape. The Spectra Advance is powered by 2 dual hub motors, but the awkward thing is that the motors are in the front wheels. And 2 issues crop up because of this. Firstly, when you're accelerating, if you accelerate a little bit too much, you're going to end up nosediving into the concrete, which has happened to me a fair few times. Secondly, the board has a kicktail, and if you use a kicktail the way it is intended, the front wheels lift off the ground. That causes some issues when those front wheels contain the motors. Also, about the kicktail, I don't know why you would even bother having one when your core design is to apply the brakes when you put your weight on your back foot. For all the things that you would use a kicktail for, like tic-tacking around corners, falling off ledges, popping manuals, the braking system kind of makes them all redundant. However, I did notice that their new board that they're releasing, the Spectra X, has the motors in the rear wheels, along with a bunch of other features and apparently an improved 3D step posture control system. So I'd be really interested to check that one out. The Spectra Advance is powered by an 88.8 watt battery running Panasonic 18650 cells. So the good news is that this board is airline travel friendly, but because the battery is inside the enclosure, it is super difficult to swap it out. So as standard, the Spectra Advance doesn't come with a remote. You can use the app, but I feel that there is just too much latency between the board and the remote for it to be viable. Or you can purchase a remote from Spectra and use it with the board. In the box, you also get a charger, a T-tool, user manual, and some cool little stickers. Plus, the charger is really tiny and the connector is actually in the shape of the Walnut logo, which is a cool little touch. So, what's the verdict? Well, I actually really like the idea of having a posture-controlled electric skateboard, and the Spectra Advanced comes really close to perfecting it. It just needs to be tweaked to make the riding experience feel more natural from the get-go. At the moment, it has a long learning curve, but if you are patient and persistent enough, you will eventually figure it out. It also learns from you just as much as you learn it, so finding that middle ground takes a bit of time. But once you do, I think it's a great little electric skateboard to get you to those a little too far to walk places.